class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we will be discussing some real NHL news. So, of course, as we know, the NHL season had been cancelled, or I guess you could say postponed now, in around mid-March due to the coronavirus pandemic, and it was a wonder when or even if the NHL season would end up resuming, and it seems as though now there are concrete plans to bring it back with a sort of 24-team playoff-style tournament to determine who will win the Stanley Cup. Of course, there were so many teams who worked very hard this regular season through the first 70 or so games prior to the cancellation of the season to try and win the Stanley Cup. A lot of teams may have actually gone somewhat all-in this season at the deadline or even just in the off-season to try and make a move. And so not awarding the Stanley Cup this season would definitely do a disservice to some of these teams. And so the NHL has decided to actually bring it back. And so what they've decided to do, instead of just taking the top 8 teams from each conference like the normal playoffs has, because there are a lot of teams that are on the outside looking in, but by very, very minimal margins, and it would be pretty unfair to just cut off at 8, considering there were still like 11 or 12 games left for a lot of teams, they have decided to instead expand that to the top 12 teams of each conference and then just end the regular season right there. So for us Sharks fans, the regular season is indeed over. The Sharks, along with the Kings and the Ducks in the Western Conference, will not be participating for the rest of this season, and so we will have to wait a lot longer before any more Sharks hockey. Now, they decided to take 24 teams, which is a bit interesting. I thought they could have potentially gone with 20. Obviously, they couldn't take 16 because, as I said, there were teams that were just barely out of the playoff race. But there are teams now with this 24-team format, like the Canadiens, like the Blackhawks, who basically had zero chance of making the playoffs, who are now able to actually participate and could potentially even make it to that final 16, because the 16 teams that actually make it are going to be really called the playoffs. Prior to that, it's going to be a play-in series that won't be considered regular season, but also won't really be considered playoffs. So speaking of that play-in, it will be between the bottom 8 seeds, or from seeds 5 to 12 from both conference. So in the East, we have the Penguins, the Hurricanes, the Islanders, the Leafs, the Jackets, the Panthers, the Rangers, and the Canadiens, as 5 will play 12, 6, 11, 7, 10, 8, and 9. And in the Western Conference, we have the Oilers, the Predators, the Canucks, the Flames, the Jets, the Wild, the Coyotes, and the Blackhawks, and of course, 5 to 12, 6, 11, 7, 10, and 8 to 9. And what these teams will do is they'll play a sort of playoff series, but instead of a best of 7, a best of 5. But it will indeed still have playoff rules, meaning that if games go past regulation, they will be decided in 20-minute overtime periods that will go on and on until a winner is actually decided. Now, the winners of these play-in series will advance to what is the real playoffs and will end up facing off against one of the top 4 seeds from their respective conference. So in the Eastern Conference, the Bruins, the Lightning, the Capitals, and the Flyers, and in the Western Conference, the Blues, the Avalanche, the Golden Knights, and the Stars. Now, coming into the play-ins, of course, these teams will have a couple of exhibition games, I should say, before they can actually get into the real game, just to try and get back up to NHL speed. But of course, these teams will end up playing some do or die games in this best of 5 series to try and make it to the playoffs. So just throwing them into a series after that with one of these top 4 seeds would be pretty unfair for the top 4 seeds. And so the top 4 seeds will actually have an opportunity to play some games of their own in a round-robin style tournament right before the play-ins actually begin, I would suspect, just to keep up the sort of competitive integrity, which I'll get to maybe a bit later. So in this round robin, a team like the Bruins would play the Lightning, the Capitals, and the Flyers once, just to determine the seeding of these 4 teams. So let's say the Bruins were to win all 3 games, they would be the first seed, and they would end up playing the winner of the 8th and 9th seed matchup between the Leafs and the Jackets. The Lightning would then play the winner of the 7th-10, the 3rd seed of the round robin, I should say, not necessarily the Capitals, would play the winner of the 16-11, and of course the 4th seed would play the winner of the Penguins and Canadiens matchup. Now, I said that this would be good for competitive integrity to have it before the play-ins, as of course, it could be favorable to actually just not be the top seed from this round robin. For instance, if the Canadiens are to upset the Penguins, maybe if you were that first seed like the Boston Bruins, you decide to just not try so hard in those games so you can get that fourth seed and match up against the Canadiens, compared to if you're the first seed where you're having to play the winner of the Leafs Blue Jackets series. An 8th or 9th seed will end up being better, at least on paper, than the 12th seed Montreal Canadiens if they do pull off that upset. Now, it of course does have some problems at that point. For instance, a team like the Leafs, a team like the Blue Jackets, a team like the Islanders, all these teams in the play-ins will be playing for their lives. If the Islanders lose that best-of-5 series, they're out for the rest of the year, compared to the round-robin series where the Bruins, if they lose all 3 of those games, well, there's still the actual playoffs to look forward to. And so those teams in the playoffs will be playing in some real do-or-die games. They'll really get the blood pumping, compared to the round robin teams, which maybe won't be able to try so hard. So once we come to that first round of the actual playoffs, let's just say Hurricanes versus let's say a 3rd seed Capitals, the Hurricanes will really be ready for some playoff hockey, compared to the Capitals, who maybe didn't take the round-robin games as seriously. However, there was never really going to be a perfect format. As I said, 24 teams is already kind of not that great, and now all of a sudden you have to sort of work in this format as well. But if we wanted to see some playoff hockey this season, you have to make some sort of sacrifices in this situation. I think the NHL managed to land pretty well here. Now, of course, the next question would be, when does this actually start? There are no set dates. However, it has been said that training camps for the team, so basically a precursor for anything that could happen here, will only open past July 1st. So it's possible we could be waiting a month, maybe even a couple of months before this type of tournament actually starts, at which point, it could very well take a good 2.5 months. And it has been said that by Bettman that while the 2021 season, the one after this one, will be the full 82 games, it's possible it doesn't start until around mid-December, or to possibly even early January, which would obviously delay the 2021 season significantly. Take a look at a normal NHL regular season, what the 1920 season was planned on being. It goes from the start of October to the start of April. That is a 7-month span. If this 2021 season were to begin in January, a 7-month span would take us to early July. Then the playoffs usually start at around mid-April and go to around early mid-June. That's about 2 months. An early July regular season finish could bring us to about a mid-September playoff finish, which would then delay the 21-22 season, which would bring further type of complications. Not only will these seasons continually be delayed because of the fact that this one was delayed so significantly, but a team like Seattle, who of course we don't know the team name of, was supposed to be joining the NHL as the 32nd team for the 21-22 season. If that season ends up being delayed for this reason, when does the expansion draft happen? All of those types of questions do begin to arise. So a lot of issues have come from the fact that the season was forced to be postponed for these couple of months, and now expanding closer to 3-4 months. But with all that said, the good news is we will be getting some playoff hockey this season. I'm sure a lot of people have been itching just to see any type of hockey at all, and the fact that we'll get some very meaningful games right away will be nice to see. And so while the format isn't perfect, as I said, it's good enough to please me. Class dismissed.